Good morning, everyone. My name is Mark Levine, and I am the Deputy Director of your New York State Association of Counties. On behalf of Jack Marin, our President, and Stephen Aquario, our Executive Director, I want to thank you for joining us this morning for a virtual fall seminar workshop about technology options for public hearings. As the COVID-19 pandemic and social distancing requirements prohibited large gatherings, counties had to adopt new technological tools to conduct county business and hold open meetings. In this workshop, you'll learn about what counties did and the best practices that may help you host socially distanced open meetings in the future should we need to, that meet statutory requirements and provide citizens and stakeholders with the opportunity to effectively participate in their governments. This is week 3 of NYSAC's first virtual fall seminar. It began on September 15th and it will wrap up on Thursday. We appreciate all of our county members for participating in these workshops, and we are pleased as your association staff to put them together for you. We are joined this morning by 3 distinguished presenters, and I will introduce you to them in just a moment. First, I would like to thank Barton and LaJudas for sponsoring this workshop. Barton and LaJudas has nearly 60 years of experience helping communities through the Northeast and Mid-Atlantic states meet their engineering, environmental science, planning, and landscape architecture needs. They provide planning, funding, procurement, site design, engineering, and construction phase services for projects involving facilities, sustainable design, green infrastructure, recreational facilities, renewable energy, site utilities, waste and water and wastewater, solid waste, transportation, municipal engineering, community revitalization, and environmental issues. You name it, they do it. The firm has offices across New York State as well as in Pennsylvania, Maryland, and New Jersey. Please join me in thanking Barton and LaJudas for helping us make this workshop and our fall seminar available to all NYSAC County members. Attendees, if you have questions during this presentation, please type them into the question panel in your webinar dashboard. We will take them up after the speakers finish their presentations. We are joined this morning by Patrick Cummings, NYSAC's counsel, and he will do the Q&A at the end of the presentations. At this time, it is my pleasure to introduce our first speaker. Kristen O'Neill was appointed Assistant Director of the Committee on Open Government in 2015. She received her law degree from the University at Albany and a BA from Lemoyne College. As Assistant Director of the committee, Ms. O'Neill provides legal advice regarding application of the New York State Freedom of Information, open meetings, and the personal privacy protection laws. She has addressed numerous organizations in New York State and authored hundreds of written advisory opinions. She has spoken on open government laws and concepts throughout the state before government representatives, advocacy organizations, and media representatives. Prior to joining the committee, Ms. O'Neill was a member of the Office of Counsel at the New York State Office of Mental Health and served as the agency records access officer. Thank you for joining us this morning, Kristen.
Thank you, Mark. Thanks for having me. So my job, as I am not a tech expert, my job is just to talk about the law a little bit, what the open meetings law requires and what the executive orders relating to the suspension of the in-person requirement of the open meetings law, how those two things play together, and then people with more knowledge than I can talk about how they've actually handled these issues with technology. So we want to go on to the next slide. This is the statute. Next slide. So the intent of the open meetings law is to be assured that public business is performed in an open and public manner, and that citizens be fully aware of and be able to observe the performance of public officials. Citizens have the right to attend and listen to the deliberations and decisions that go into the making of public policy. That's the intent of the open meetings law. Next. In mid-March, starting actually in early March, our office started to get some phone calls down from downstate New Rochelle, Westchester County, asking about how they should respond, how they should handle issues relating to the open meetings law when they had concerns about public health and safety and having large gatherings of individuals. When the transmission, it was very early on, people really did not, there was a lot of lack of information, I should say, lack of information about how the coronavirus spread, and no one really knew how to handle these issues. Our office was in the process of preparing some informal guidance. The Committee on Open Government doesn't have the authority to waive any of the requirements of the open meetings law, but we also were in a position to understand that we did not want any public body to expose their members or the public to any public health concerns to endanger life or safety. So we were in the process of performing some informal guidance when luckily Governor Cuomo started the process of issuing executive orders relating to disaster emergencies. On March 13th, Governor Cuomo declared, in response to the disaster emergency, declared, pursuant to New York State Executive Law, Section 28, issued Executive Order 202.1. So now we're up to like 60 something. So you can see this was one of the very first executive orders that was issued, and it contained quite a few things, but one of the aspects of 202.1 suspended certain aspects of the open meetings law relating to in-person attendance. Next. What you see on the screen is the actual language of the section of Executive Order 202.1 that related to the open meetings law. And what it said is that Article 7 of the Public Officers Law, which is the open meetings law, was suspended to the extent necessary to permit any public body to meet and take such actions authorized by law without permitting public in-person access to meetings, and authorizing that such meetings to be held remotely by conference call or similar service, provided that the public has the ability to view or listen to such proceedings, and that such meetings are recorded and later transcribed. So there's a couple things here. One is that the public bodies, as long as they provided some sort of remote access to the public, whether it be by teleconference, video conference, webcast, live stream, broadcast, they could hold their meetings in a way that would prohibit the public from attending in person. In addition, this also allowed members of the public body to not meet together in person. So, for example, all members of the public body of a county legislature could be sitting at home and be participating by WebEx or Zoom or some other program of that nature. They didn't all have to be in the same room together. And we can talk, I'm going to go a little bit more about how that impacts the open meetings law, or how these two play together in just a second. So we'll go on to the next slide. So Executive Order 202.1 did not prohibit public bodies from allowing in-person attendance at their meetings. It gave them the discretion to act in their constituents' best interest. It gave them the discretion to prohibit in-person attendance at their meetings. At this point, this executive order has been extended multiple times and is currently in effect until October 4th, 2020. Starting around this time every month, I start getting dozens of phone calls asking me if I know whether the executive order is going to be extended again. My answer is always that I'm not in the loop. The governor's office doesn't keep me in the loop on whether those extensions are going to take place. But if I were a betting woman at this point, I would continue to believe that there will be another extension. If I were really a betting woman, I think I would bet that it may be through at least through the winter. If you're have concerns about public health and safety, there's certainly you're going to want to make sure that, you know, when you have coronavirus that's still in effect, that's still circulating, and on top of that, then we're adding flu season to the mix. I would not be surprised at all if this continued to get extended for another couple of months, but I don't want anyone to take my word for it on that. Next slide, please. So I tried to do a little bit of a side-by-side on this about how the executive orders affect the open meetings law. So the definition of meeting, you're only allowed under normal circumstances, putting Corona aside, under normal circumstances, the only two ways for a public body to gather together for the purpose of conducting business is either physically in each other's presence or through the use of video conferencing. Executive Order 202.1 suspended that requirement in that members of the public body do not need to be in each other's physical presence, and they don't necessarily need to use video conferencing. A lot of public bodies continue to use video conferencing for participation, but they could have just actually done teleconferencing. The executive order allowed for teleconferencing, so members could achieve a quorum, conduct public business, and vote all by teleconference. Again, many places did use video conferencing and webcasting, things of that nature, but teleconferencing was permitted. Next slide, please. So again, all these little points, all these little small parts of the open meetings law that were impacted by the executive order. So of course, the open meetings law says every meeting of the public body shall be open to the general public. That was suspended by the executive order. Public bodies shall make or cause to be made all reasonable efforts to ensure that meetings are held in facilities that permit barrier-free physical access and that are held in an appropriate facility which can adequately accommodate members of the public who wish to attend such meetings. With the executive order, if a public body chooses to hold their meetings remotely and provide remote access, those two provisions of the open meetings law are also suspended because they are not required to be held in facilities that are ADA compliant or large enough to accommodate the crowds. Another provision of the open meetings law that was suspended is that under normal circumstances, when an agency, or excuse me, when a public body chooses to use video conferencing to allow one of its members to participate, so say you have a majority of your board members, of your legislators are all present in one room, but 2 or 3 are out of town or for whatever reason can't be physically there in person to attend the meeting. The open meetings law has always allowed participation by video conference if you meet certain requirements. One of those requirements is that the public has to have the opportunity to attend, listen, and observe at any site at which a member participates. So if you have a member participating out of state via video conference, notice of the meeting must state that a member is participating by video conference. From where they're participating, they must give an address, a location where they're participating from, and the public has the right to attend from that location. That provision of the open meetings law was also suspended by the executive order because members of a public body who are participating by video conference were not required to open, like for example, if they're doing it from home or their offices, they were not required to open their doors to the public and let anyone come in. They were not required to allow to permit in-person attendance when they were participating by video conference. Next slide, please. Notice requirements, I just mentioned this, I think I already sort of covered this, is that normally under normal circumstances, if a member is going to participate by video conferencing, the notice of the meeting must state that a person is participating by video conference and the location from which they're attending, and that the notice must state that the public has a right to attend the meeting from any location, whether it's the primary physical location or secondary video conferencing locations. That was suspended by the open meetings law. The notice does not need to indicate where each of the members are participating from. That's fine. While the executive order is silent on this fact, the public notice of a meeting must include the location of a meeting. In my mind, an appropriate substitution for the location of the meeting would be to provide instructions how to remotely access the meeting, whether it be a WebEx or Zoom address, a YouTube site, or Facebook Live site. However you are providing the public with remote access, that information should be included in the meeting notice. All right, next slide, please. Let's see. I just want to make sure, because some of these things apply to just state agencies. So I talked about the meeting location and how you should substitute location with the information about how to access the meeting remotely. And so there is a section of the open meetings law that states, if a meeting will be streamed live over the internet, the public notice for the meeting shall inform the public of the internet address of the website streaming such meeting. That requirement is not suspended by the executive order. You should continue to do that. Next slide, please. Requirements that never existed before is the contemporaneous remote access to the public. There's never been an obligation under the open meetings law to provide contemporaneous remote access to the public. Now there is. I don't think this is occurring anymore, but back in March and even April, there was confusion about whether the remote access had to be contemporaneous. Our office did confirm with the governor's office that that was the intent. So for example, it would not be appropriate for a public body to record its meeting and post it a couple of hours later on their website. You can do this, but it wouldn't be compliant with the open requirements of the open meetings law. There has to be contemporaneous remote access. The public has to be able to, at a minimum, listen to the meeting while the meeting is occurring. In addition, public bodies must record and later transcribe their meetings. In our view, transcription does not have to be performed by a stenographer or professional service. It can be performed by an employee or electronically by the remote access service. So for example, if you're using Zoom or WebEx or some program like that, and those programs will prepare a transcript for you, feel free to use that as your transcript. The executive order does not include a time limit for preparing the transcript. Our office understands that this is sort of a big ask. It could be possibly an onerous requirement for staff to prepare transcripts of potentially 4 or 5 hour long meetings. There's no time limit on it. My feeling is this shouldn't necessarily be a priority. Other things, particularly if you have the meeting recorded, the transcript can be prepared at a later time. Perhaps even waiting to see if someone makes a Freedom of Information Law request before taking staff resources aside to prepare that transcript. From our office's perspective, it shouldn't really be the first priority you concern yourself with. Let's see, next, please. So this just relates a little bit to essential meetings, essential gatherings. So while I mentioned that Executive Order 202.1 relating to the suspension of the in-person requirement for the open meetings law didn't prohibit in-person attendance, there were other executive orders that came out that said that there shouldn't be any non-essential gatherings of more than certain sizes, whether it's early on, maybe it was 500 and then 50 and then 10, and now we're going back in the other direction and we're, I think, up to 50. The question was, well, is a meeting of a public body an essential gathering or a non-essential gathering? I'm not sure I ever got the best answer to that question. I don't know how clear it is. I think if a public body had the ability to hold its meetings remotely, then it seems to me that it would not be necessary to hold an in-person meeting, but that's just my opinion on the matter. In April, the governor issued Executive Order 202.17 concerning gatherings of people in public places, and this relates to whether it's essential or non-essential. So any individual over the age of 2 and able to medically tolerate face covering shall be required to cover their nose and mouth with a mask or cloth face covering when in public space and unable to maintain or when not maintaining a social distance. So if you choose, as a public body, if you choose to open your meetings up to the public and to allow in-person access, you do need to keep in mind that you still need to comply with all the governor's other executive orders relating to health and safety, whether it's social distancing or whether it's face coverings. You want to make sure that you're complying with those other executive orders. Go ahead, next slide, please. That executive order is also in effect through October 4th, and I also anticipating it being extended. Next slide, please. So some of these, I apologize, I'm maybe talking before we get to the slide that actually, so as I said, some public bodies may be ready to recommence essential meetings in person. Just remember to make sure that you're complying with other executive orders relating to those in-person meetings if you choose to do so. Next, please. So practically speaking, make sure social distancing, masking, any other administration requirements. In our opinion, if there is a question about whether your public body is able to maintain a safe space in which to hold your essential open meeting, it really must provide a contemporaneous video or audio broadcast such that members of the public who cannot safely attend in person have the ability to view or listen to such proceedings, and that such meetings are recorded and later transcribed. So for example, if the size of your meeting room is normally large enough to accommodate the crowds that are expected, but due to maybe social distancing requirements, whatever if you really can't fit the number of people that want to attend the meeting in your physical space and maintain safety, then I think you should continue to have your meetings available remotely. Public bodies should not be artificially limiting attendance at their meetings by, for example, again, if you normally attract 50 people to your meeting and the site where you hold your meetings really can only safely accommodate 25, it would not be appropriate to just say, well, we're only going to let the first 25 people in the door and everyone else is out of luck. In my opinion, you should be perhaps providing both options available to the public, as long as the public is fully aware that the physical location will be limited to the first 25 people and that everyone else will have to participate by video conference. My concern with that plan is that the 26th person is going to get sent home and be annoyed and miss half the meeting because it's going to take some time to get home and they may miss the meeting. The better option is, if you normally gather, in my mind, the better option is if you know your meetings normally attract a gathering larger than what you can safely accommodate, perhaps it's better just to prohibit in-person attendance altogether and only just have the remote access. Next slide, please. So that is my part, and I think I'm right around the time mark that I was supposed to take up. So always keep in mind that our office is available for questions. We're here as a resource regarding the Freedom of Information Law and the Open Meetings Law. That's our phone number. When I'm telecommuting, the telephone goes to my cell phone if nobody's in the office to pick up the phone. The Coug email address that you see goes to our general box, and then I've also provided my direct email account.
Thank you, Kristen, and thank you for being a partner with us and with our counties and local governments throughout this entire process. This has not been an easy time the last six and a half months, and we appreciate your advice and support along the way. So thank you.
Thank you, Mark.
Now I would like to introduce our second speaker. Brian Young has worked for Ontario County for over 28 years. He has been the interim county administrator since April 2020 and held the position of deputy county administrator since May 2016. Prior to that, he was the director of workforce development for 16 years and worked his way up to his current position. Brian graduated from St. John Fisher College with a Bachelor's of Science in Human Resource Management. He completed the Leading, Educating, and Developing Leadership Training at the University of Virginia in 2014. In addition to his duties as a public official, Brian has been an active member on multiple community and church boards, coached his sons in youth athletics, and served as an assistant scoutmaster with Boy Scouts. Thank you, Brian, for all the work that you do in Ontario County, and thank you for joining us this morning to share your insights on how Ontario County has been conducting its public meetings since the beginning of the pandemic.
Thank you, Mark. Can you hear me okay? Mark?
Yes, I can hear you loud and clear.
All right, good, very good. Thank you. And thank you to NYSAC for all that you've done for the last 7 months during this pandemic, because I know you guys have been using the technology and communicating with the counties and all of the elected officials throughout New York State for several months, and you guys have been working tirelessly to do that. So thank you very much. So I'm going to talk about our board meetings. We have a board of supervisors, and right from the get-go, from the COVID crisis, our board meetings went virtual at the end of March. We were forced into it like everybody else was, and at the beginning of our board meetings, we do have our public hearings, but in addition to our public meetings, to meet the requirements that Kristen has just went over, we had to implement things very quickly and work out the bugs as we went along, honestly. So initially, all of our meetings were virtual, as everybody else, I think, were. Currently, we are doing a hybrid option. As Kristen had mentioned, because of the size of our building and our location, we were not adequately sized so that we could have our possible public and keeping our maintaining the number of attendance under 50, as well as social distancing. Our board is 21 members. We couldn't have that, along with the handfuls of staff that were involved, and to be able to allow the public to be there. So we chose to use technology as our option. So next slide, please. So this is just my presentation outline that I'll go over today, and why we chose the Cisco WebEx and the reasons behind our choice, and just some of the data behind it and what we've done. Obviously, you need champions to help make this work, including our clerk and deputy clerk to the Board of Supervisors. And I'll go over certainly the benefits and the pitfalls. And then there's multiple platforms that everybody is well aware of. And then any questions, I guess, we'll answer at the end of the presentation. So next slide, please. So obviously, COVID made us move very quickly into this new format. Actually, our information technology department had been looking at implementing a Zoom type application, and Zoom has become the new Kleenex of tissues of the IT world. So in these virtual workshops, we began looking at this as a result of our space and security study that we implemented in 2019. We were looking at our 5-year space study for our own buildings and as departments have expanded, we were looking to look for 5 years out as to what our building needs were and our security needs, and as well as 10 years out. So we were looking at a 5-year and a 10-year timeline. And as part of that, we saw that the trends globally were moving towards remote work. So we were starting to consider technology as a resource for us back in 2019. So our information technology staff had been looking at this kind of on their own at the time, and what they were looking most clearly was about the security of our network. because we certainly hear about people being Zoom bombed, and I'm familiar with places that have been bombed with inappropriate content. So we were very concerned with the security of our computer network. So staff at the time, last fall, at the end of 2019, we really didn't see that we had a need for such technology. However, obviously we know that COVID kicked in and we went quickly to that. And our IT department was well positioned to move us into this platform. It also integrated, Cisco is also our phone system, so it integrated nicely with our phone system. Next slide, please. So in March, this WebEx offered us initially a 90-day free trial with enough licenses to be able to allow staff that were working remotely to be able to communicate employee to employee and supervisor to employee. This really got us started down this road. And then we certainly found the expansion to work with our clients and our customers, and mental health really took the lead on some of this and began providing services remotely that ultimately led to our telemedicine license that we have. And we were able to purchase this as a bundled service with our phone system, as I've already mentioned. So after 90 days, we were able to bundle it like, you know, you do your car insurance and homeowners. We bundled it, we saved some money that way, and now every employee has a license and available to do this. So we are looking to expand some of the uses as we've been involved with WebEx. We are starting to learn that there's more capability for us. There's an events portion of that is probably more appropriate for our board meetings and our larger scale public meetings. It allows for more interactive communication with the public as well as the board members. And we're even considering expanding it to do some of the other in-person workshops that we've done in the past to more of a virtual application, like our Citizens Academy, which is a 6-week outreach to the community about county government. Next slide, please. So just some data since the end of March. We've conducted now over 4,400 total meetings, not just public meetings, just total meetings. So that may be staff communicating with each other. It may be us communicating other ways where we conduct our WebEx meetings. So over 2,400 hours worth of meetings. There have been 93 unique hosts or people that have implemented the meetings, with over almost 15,000 participants, which is pretty impressive. Obviously, that's a duplicated number, but 15,000 people have participated. And our average length of our meeting is about 33 minutes long. Next slide, please. So this doesn't happen unless you have other champions outside of the IT department. The IT department is approximately 12 people. So we have to make sure that we have other individuals that are quickly able to use this, those that can take control of the meetings and then also train others. And certainly our clerk and our deputy clerk to the Board of Supervisors who manage those board meetings, our standing committee meetings that are open to the public, they are two of the folks that have really taken charge of that function for us. We've also had other outside the clerk in our public meetings, but our director of mental health is taking the lead on her operation and getting their staff able to provide services to clients that way. And our planning director has been instrumental. He really has led the charge with other municipalities. He kept up every time there was an executive order, up to 202.60, he would track those executive orders to make sure that the exemptions to the open meetings law were allowed to continue. And I'm sure that as of October 4th, he will be on top of that one as well if it gets extended again, which we do anticipate that will happen. And the planning director really worked with our municipalities, including those that had zoning board of appeals meetings coming up, town planning boards, etc. And he was advising them on the latest updates and how to use some of this technology. So he did a great job with that as the executive orders came out. So next slide, please. Some of the benefits that we found with our meetings was that we definitely had increased participation, not only from the public, but our board and our staff. So people were able to, be at home basically and, view a meeting and participate if they felt like they needed to. It was somewhat of an awkward situation, just like it is right now. I'm speaking to my computer. I'm not looking at anybody. For whatever reason, my camera's not working, but somewhat of an awkward feeling. But we did see improved participation from the public as well as our board and our staff. And there's certainly many benefits, I think, that outweigh the pitfalls or the areas that we experience some difficulty in. It is certainly an efficient and cost-effective way from a travel perspective. I know that even though it was summertime, we had a hot summer, we had some board members that participated via the WebEx when we were allowed to have in-person meetings, and we are allowed. They chose to stay home because it was too warm out, and they decided not to travel the 15-20 miles for the meeting in person, and chose to stay home. So there is that, which could, for the winter time, as we do have weather-related events, it would allow us to continue with a board meeting in that manner. It does interface, WebEx, the Cisco WebEx application does interface with our Outlooks email system and our calendar, so we are able to schedule meetings that way. It's very easy. And there is a mobile app that allows us to, people could view it with their handheld phone on their smartphone. Next slide, please. Some of the pitfalls that we did see early on, and our IT department really kept track of this, was the individual's internet connection. We do have somewhat of a rural area, and so some people were working off slow internet connections, and the IT staff could view, they could go in the backside of this and they could view the analytics on the system and look at individual users to see whether or not their connection was up to speed and had enough speed to be able to support the virtual meeting. So some people would drop, their camera would drop, their connection would drop, maybe while they were speaking. So that was, one of the frustrations I think that some folks experienced, was that, they would be talking along, and then next thing you know, we couldn't hear them and their connection would be gone. Another one that happened to me for the first meeting I think that I hosted as a large meeting, was I had two connections, audio connections opened up at once. So I was getting some terrible feedback, and that was one of the things that we would see also in our board meetings. We would see supervisors or other individuals that would have more than one audio connection open. And that's where I think the champion or the host, the person running the meeting, is quickly able to mute those lines or unmute them as needed. And certainly, muting and unmuting, as NISAC is familiar with the many phone calls that they did back in April with county leaders every day, 7 days a week. The mute and unmute feature, I'm sure it was frustrating. Sometimes it was comical, but mostly, hearing if you were unmuted on the line, making sure that people were able to do that. And so the host is really key in that role, to be able to mute unnecessary noise, but allow people to speak appropriately. And that could be an area where the public may not, if they're participating on a call as a call-in user, that we would want to make sure that we allowed them a chance to speak if there was a public hearing. In setting up a conference room, I know that we do have some smaller conference rooms now that we're in a hybrid situation where we do allow people to come in person as well as virtual. So in that setup, we have to make sure that the audio connection is sufficient for everybody to be able to speak and hear. And sometimes it's a challenge, but in one of our conference rooms, we have the camera has the microphone inside the camera. And so we need to make sure that that camera is, the camera microphone is not used, and we use a conference room phone, which gives us a better audio connection. So setting up that conference room with cameras that have mics in them is something that you have to be careful of. Early on, when everything was happening in March and April, the accessibility for cameras for individuals' desktop. So in order for them to be seen, they need, a lot of computers did not have cameras in them. So we were purchasing some cameras, typically off Amazon, and there was a shortage for a while. And now camera access has been improved, and we are able to purchase some cameras right now. And then for any individual, not just necessarily clients that don't have the proper equipment in order to make this, to participate. However, you can, you can participate via teleconference and through your phones, through your phone or smartphone or home phone if necessary. And so at the beginning of all of this, the public perception, we did have a couple of instances where the link to the public didn't work so well. And so there was difficulty for the public to be able to connect. And so at the time that there was some interpretation that we were not allowing the public to participate. However, the connection just wasn't working correctly. And so that was a problem for us that we've since corrected. And I think it only happened to us at one meeting that it was a problem. I mentioned the identification of the call-in users. So during a public hearing, you want to make sure that you do identify who those call-in users are, especially if they will participate, just like you would in person. And I think, most of the most important thing is being patient. This likely is not going to go away anytime soon. So for individuals to be patient in their use of technology. So next slide, please. So just some other platforms that I noted, and there's very many of them. I just picked the ones that I think that I've participated in mostly, besides Cisco WebEx. I think this one is a GoToMeeting that we're on, or a GoToWebinar, but you're seeing more and more places use Microsoft Teams. I think a lot of the school districts are starting to use Microsoft Teams. We did do a Facebook Live. It wasn't a public hearing, but it was a presentation with our public health department on the status of coronavirus in our county at the time. We used Facebook Live, and now we've been using our community college cable TV channel to help get the word out. So currently our space, we did not have a location. However, we've been in the middle of a building project that will allow our Board of Supervisors to have appropriate chambers with plenty of space. So we're actually going to be conducting for the first time on Thursday, our first board meeting in that new space, which will allow us to socially distance appropriately. We won't have the traditional setup of kind of the U shape that our board would have, but we will have more of a classroom style where we're able to be 6 feet apart and allow plenty of room for the public to participate if they choose to come, but while also maintaining that, we're still trying to maintain the 50 or under. We are maintaining that 50 or under participation, but we do want to make sure that the public is allowed to participate, and we will continue to do this via WebEx. So our board meetings will continue to be sort of a hybrid where board members can be present in person or they can be present virtually and allow the public to participate as well. So that's all I have.
Thank you, Brian, very much. Yes, we have all become experts in the ability to mute or unmute, how to host these meetings to make sure they're not disruptive, right? So thanks, Brian, very much for your time and in sharing your experiences with our attendees this morning.
All right, thanks,
Our
Mark.
third speaker this morning is Aaron Martin. He's the clerk of the board for the Broome County Legislature. For 13 years, Aaron worked with New York State Senator Thomas Libous of Binghamton as legislative assistant, public affairs coordinator, and for 10 years as the legislative director. As the LD, Aaron managed the Albany office and served as the office's lead staffer on policy and budget matters, and was responsible for representing the office in negotiations with the Assembly and the Governor's office. Policy specialties include transportation, mental health, and developmental disabilities, higher education, economic development, and parks and rec. He was named one of the 40 under 40 rising stars by the Capitol in 2010. The next year, in 2011, Aaron was appointed clerk of the Broome County Legislature. In that role, Aaron supervises a staff of 4 that ensure that the administrative and operational functions of the legislature are performed with a high standard of excellence, and that legislators receive assistance with policy research, constituent services, and public affairs projects. Aaron also serves as the Chief of Staff Advisor to the Chairman of the Legislature, as well as the lead staff liaison for the legislature to the County Executive's Office, county department heads, and outside governmental and community organizations. Aaron currently serves as the second Vice President of the New York State Association of Clerks of County Legislative Boards, is a member of the Broome County Municipal Clerks Association, serves as chairman of the Broome County Land Bank Corporation Board of Directors, is a member of the Broome County COVID-19 Economic Recovery Cabinet, and is an active member of Vestal Rotary Club, and is a past president of the Broome County Traffic Safety Board. Aaron, you are a busy guy, and we appreciate you taking the time this morning. And last night, we were emailing back and forth at 1 a.m. So thank you for taking the time today and to share your experiences and expertise with our attendees. Thanks.
Thanks, Mark. Everybody can hear me okay?
Good.
Excellent. Thank you. And Mark, we appreciate everything that you and Steve and your team are doing. None of us expected to be where we are today. And while we've adjusted here in Broome County, as other counties have and other municipals have and individuals have, I have 2 young kids, so that adds to the excitement of all of this. But your organization, NYSEC, has been critical in helping us work through a lot of these challenges, helping us not only on these types of issues, but on the other broader policy issues that we're all facing. I can tell you from my perspective of serving as the clerk of the legislature here, it's been invaluable, the contact that I've had with my colleagues around the state, because we can learn a lot from each other. And we're in this together, really. Even though we're working on this independently, we're really sharing information with each other that helps us all move forward, and I learned a lot from that. I appreciate also, the former 2 presenters, because it gives me an opportunity to see what we're doing, how that differs from what they're doing. And I was sort of smiling when Brian was talking about some of the challenges that he's worked through and they've worked through, and some of the questions that we've been working through over the months as well. And the Committee on Open Government, of course, has been a big help to us. The way I sort of approach this is to say, what are the challenges that come up as it relates to this? Now, just a couple things about Broome County, the legislature, which would be helpful to know. One, we've been pretty progressive as it relates to technology. Over the years, we've tried to minimize the use of paper, tried to encourage legislators and others, the public, to access us through the internet, through the website, through social media. Those are things we've always put a premium on. The chairman of the legislature is very forward thinking as it relates to that. And so we put a lot of time into that. However, as it relates to meeting virtually or in a hybrid manner, that's something that the facts of how that would have to be done pre-COVID were a challenge to us. Noticing meetings when someone is at their house and having people be able to go there, or if they're on vacation, that sort of thing. And there's sort of always been a premium also put upon the idea that people can see and touch their legislator. There's something about face-to-face contact that most elected officials enjoy and want to encourage. So we were sort of set up that way come March, and we also had a fortunate situation that our legislature, which is in session once a month, happened to just meet very shortly before the order went into effect to shut everything down. So when you think about the timing of this, we had maybe a little more time than others did because we were at the beginning of our monthly process versus in the middle or at the end. So we had a little time to adjust to what we were facing. Kate, if you want to hit the next slide, please. So what are the things we were sort of looking at? Where do we start? Well, there's all these things I've listed. We can go through them one by one, but there's different slides on each of them. What is it that we're supposed to do now? What is it that the order requires? Obviously, sitting around in a room together is not going to be a good approach, but what do we have to do in order to meet virtually? And how do we do that? That's something that the technology existed for years about this, but not something that we spent a lot of time talking about how to make happen. On top of all that, how do we ensure that things continue to happen? How do we ensure that business gets done? Right? We can't grind to a halt. We want to keep those things moving. There's important policy matters that legislators have to continue to consider. And how do we do that with the county administration? How do we do that with the county executive's office, with departments, where typically we would have face-to-face contact and communication with them? On top of all that, what do we do with county legislators? What do we do with the chairman of the legislature? How do we make sure that we're not just going in blind to something and crossing our fingers? We pride ourselves on being organized here. The chairman's a very organized person. The legislators are very good as it relates to that. We have processes that exist here, like all of your counties do. It's important to us that those things come off as flawless as possible. And on top of that, how do we ensure that the public has a strong sense of the fact that things are moving forward, that they have the ability to access meetings? We work for the public, so it's important that we're able to ensure them that number one, business is being done, number two, that they have the ability to observe those proceedings. If you could hit the next slide, please. So the process, what did we do? Well, obviously the first thing that I did, as the clerk of the legislature, was consult with the chairman. How are we going to proceed on this? And we're very fortunate because our chairman is very up to speed on technology, and from that perspective, we had an easy time of it. He's very forward thinking on that, and so moving to bringing on more technology to address this situation wasn't difficult. We have 15 county legislators, 14 other county legislators who have various levels of comfort, various levels of experience. How do we interact with them? What is it that we do to help them understand what we're going through and to move forward on it? Also, consulting with the Committee on Open Government. What does this executive order mean? I think everybody probably was in the same spot we were. We were scrambling to figure that out in the early days of this, and in consulting with our county attorney on it. How do we do this? Are we legally okay on this? Not only do we want to legally be okay on it, but we want to perception-wise be okay with it. This is not something that anybody had anticipated, but we want to do the best we can, that we show the public that we're trying hard. Another critical component of this is IT. How do we technologically do this? We're going from a meeting in person to doing something remotely. And I'll tell you that I may have mentioned this before, we're still meeting remotely. The Broome County Legislature is. Our chamber is set up in such a way where the furniture is not easily movable. it's a horseshoe type situation, like probably many of you have, and 6 feet distancing is not easily accomplishable without significant capital reconstruction put into place. So we're still meeting remotely. We feel as if that it's important that we do everything we can to protect the public and the public's officials. And so right now we're still meeting that way. And we will probably for the foreseeable future. We're coming upon our budget process starting later on this week, which will be a whole host of additional meetings held via Zoom, which is the platform that we chose. And finally, consulting with the county administration and departments. The legislature has its functions, but we rely upon interaction with the county executive's office and his team and with county departments. How do we ensure that there's appropriate interaction with those folks where we're not sitting in a room? So much of what we do is in government oftentimes is face-to-face communication. Those things are important, face-to-face communication. And I think you do lose something in this format. I think it was like Brian was saying, we're talking to a screen. I can see myself and none of you. So it's sort of, you lose something in the translation. But how do we keep moving that forward? How do we ensure that the county executive has that platform to interact with us and with county departments who we rely upon to work through, business? So if you want to hit the next slide, please. So technology, this is sort of where it starts as far as how we do this. Software, Brian talked about some of those options. We don't need to, go through all that again, but we chose the Zoom platform. It's a platform that our IT department was comfortable with, that had been used, previously, although the legislature had not been a broad user of that. But it was one that we had access to, we had licenses for, and they could support pretty easily. Now, how do you roll those things out? How do you work through that with different people? We'll talk about that on the next slide, but please don't switch it just yet. So Zoom, so many options. You got to make the decision to move forward. We didn't have 6 months to make this decision. We had a couple of weeks, to make this decision. Little did we know we'd be here months and months later, but we made the decision relatively quickly. In hardware, there's another one that mattered a lot to us. All of our legislators in some form or fashion had a computer, a phone, a laptop, a tablet, that sort of thing. But we decided pretty early on that it was important to have consistency. Some counties I know had previously purchased tablets or other devices for their legislators. We worked, let's see, the first month we didn't have that in place, but by the second month we did. We had worked with our key department. We had bought tablets off of state contract. We believed it was important that there was consistency there. We want to limit any option for problems. There's going to be problems that come from this no matter what we do. There's always going to be things that happen or things we're not predicting. But where we could control things, we wanted to control them to limit areas for error. So in this case, we purchased Samsung tablets for all the county legislators off a state contract, and we also put data plans on those tablets as well, because we didn't want internet service to be, and that hasn't necessarily always been flawless, but we didn't want internet service to be an issue either. So it was important that everybody started with a baseline of what the basic capability was going to be, and then we'd work up from there. That way, that wasn't a stumbling block. So again, choosing software, choosing hardware, internet service, how you support all those things, critical component, probably number 2 after what we talked about earlier about process. How do we consult with people? What do we do? In our case, for instance, we normally have 7 7 committees, standing committees that meet each month to consider matters. And we have been using sort of a different approach to that, where we've been doing committee of the whole and putting all resolutions, all business through committee of the whole, which includes all legislators. So you go from 8 meetings a month where you're increasing your room for error, and you're going to 2. where they may be longer, they might be a couple hours long, but you're putting everything through 2 meetings rather than having 8 meetings where there's all sorts of ways for things to go sideways. And I'm not even talking about Zoom bombing, right? That's a thing we all know about. I think we've all read about that. Just talking about people knowing where to dial in, people having access or being available. All those things are things that we want to minimize the opportunity for risk. And that's really our whole approach to this. So if you want to click to the next slide, please. So training. I mean, this one I would say is right up there as far as the importance. So one of the first things that the chairman said to me and to the other 4 people who work in our office is, we need to make sure that when this goes live that we're ready to go. So how do we do that, right? We just can't hand people a tablet and say, see you tomorrow. That's not going to work. We need to spend significant time in advance working through this. So how did we do that? Well, when it came to the legislators, we did individual trainings with them on how to do Zoom. We did practice Zoom meetings in advance with them. So we weren't just showing up on the 3rd Thursday at 5 and saying, hey, what's up? We had worked with them well in advance. What access do you have at your house? What technology, what hardware do you have at your house? Once we got the new tablets, individually, a member of the staff reached out to those legislators on a couple of different occasions and walked them through how to use the tablet if they weren't up to speed or comfortable, and walked them through how to do Zoom. We did a practice Zoom meeting or 2 to make sure that everybody was comfortable on that. And we talked about how the meetings were going to progress, how they were going to take place. Here's how we do this, here's how we do this other thing, so that everybody came off as comfortable. The staff of the legislature, that's a critical component of this. So there are 5 of us total who work for the Broome County Legislature. Everyone has a role in this. It's critically important for us that each different component of these remote virtual meetings were handled by somebody. So virtual backgrounds for everyone. Those were prepared by a staff member so that there could be consistency in how the legislators looked. If they wanted to use it, they didn't have to use it. Somebody in controlling microphones. Myself and the chairman have a role in these meetings where it's difficult to be the ones controlling the microphones and everything else. We had a separate staffer responsible for that. That was their only job. We had a staffer that was responsible for renaming people. We have 15 county legislators, myself, who has a formal role typically at the meetings, and then could be 40 other people just from the county, department heads, the county executive staff, who's responsible for renaming them so we can tell who the heck they are, who's responsible for knowing where those folks are if there's a question on a legislative matter where the chairman wants to ask that question or a legislator wants to ask that question. All these, someone to record, those sort of things. Everybody had a role in this, and that was very clearly defined in advance internally what that role was, so that myself and the chairman weren't scrambling all over the place trying to figure out how to mute people, unmute people, look for potential problems. Other staff was assigned to do that as co-hosts, so that the division of labor was spread out in such a way where that stuff could be accomplished. And of course, county department heads, everybody has a mix. Our standard of how we approach this with the county legislators was different than county department heads. There's a formal role for 15 county legislators. The roles vary for department heads or other department staff who might have a place in these meetings. They, working with them to make sure that they had a basic level of capability. Not every county computer has a microphone, or at least didn't have a camera. Those things all had to be worked through, and in a way, that was probably one of the biggest challenges is to sort through all that. Next slide, please. And lastly, one of the things I talked about at the top was public awareness of what we were doing. What is it that we do to make sure that the public can access what we're doing? There's the rules that exist from the executive order, which are great. We want to make sure that we're letting the public know that business is still going on and how do they become a part of that to observe our meetings. And what methods are we using for that? So social media, we have an active Facebook page where that information is posted regularly. We have the normal stuff. Everybody has billboards, electronic signs within the building, that kind of thing. But what do you do when no one's in the building? And of course, our website where that's posted. Though it's important that that information is out there because people need to have a comfort level that their government is working and that they can see that in action. And so for us, it was about spreading the word to people through all the different methods that we had, that things were still moving forward here in Broome County, that this wasn't, psychological also as much as anything else. We're going to be okay. Things are still moving forward, even if they're just going to be a little bit different. That was sort of the talking point. Things are still a little bit different. Things are a little bit different, but we're still moving forward. And the other thing is connecting legislators, connecting their officials with individuals. That's hard to do virtually. It's hard to talk to people that way when you're a crowd of 50 or 100 people on a Zoom meeting. You can't. How do we ensure people that they can still have access to their county legislators? So you can't necessarily see them anymore at session or at a meeting where you might go to that to try to, wrangle them or get a hold of them. We had to put out information through our different methods that your legislator is still working. There's still a phone number to call her or him. There's social media ways to get a hold of them. There's email ways to get a hold of them. Here's how you see what's happening. Here's how you see what's going on. That, in a way, is as important as a lot of the other things we were doing, because there's this idea that people have firsthand access to their government. And when you can't do that anymore physically, you have to account for that other ways. So we spent a fair amount of time talking about that and working through those kind of processes. So, as I said before, we're still meeting via Zoom remotely, and we will for the foreseeable future. We have a budget process coming up. That's going to be a lot of meetings. Largely, things have gone well for us. That's not to say there's not technical difficulties that exist. You get a storm that comes and that messes with people's internet or things like that, or sometimes just a technological issue happens. But by and large, internally, we've been fine. And the key to that for us, again, was preparation and also the ability for the chairman and the staff to work through all of the different roles that exist in advance, both for running the meetings and with those other outside participants, to make sure that we had planned well in advance and that we had people responsible for different jobs and tasks. If everybody does their job, then we will minimize the room for error. And that's where we stand right now. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Aaron. And Kristen and Brian, thank you before that. This is Patrick Cummings, counsel with NYSAC. We appreciate that education that you gave our members. We've got a few questions that just came in, and if you wouldn't mind sticking around to answer a couple of these. As always, to those listening, if you think of a question afterwards, or if you share this with another county official and a question comes up, email anybody at the NYSAC staff. We will try to respond to that immediately, and we'll use our panel of experts and partners here to help answer those questions if something comes up at a later time. The first question I came in, I think this might go to all three of you. Would be can help with this on ideas, and that's with these virtual open meetings. How are you supposed to, and how the county's handling things such as executive session or attorney-client portions of these open meetings, portions that perhaps the general public is not supposed to be privy to?
I can let, if Aaron, you have ideas, or.
Yeah, I can jump in on that if you want, Kristen. Actually, you were going to go. Please go. I cut you off.
No, I was just thinking that, that there's we only just had sort of theoretical suggestions for people, such as breakout rooms or separate, separate established lines, WebEx or Zoom lines, for those separate meetings, but you'll be able to provide much more practical advice than I could.
Sure. I can tell you that we rarely have executive sessions in the county legislature. That may be because we have a county executive, and so some of the functions that a board might be dealing with from an executive or administrative standpoint through an executive session is something that's handled by the executive's office. But I can tell you that we do know how to do this. We have planned for this, and I have used this in another organization, another pseudo-governmental organization that I'm involved in. Zoom has a function where you have a waiting room, and a lot of this is technical, but those who use Zoom are probably pretty familiar, and I'm guessing the other software has the same sort of capability. We always have a waiting room set up for everything because that gives us an extra level of control if there's an issue, a Zoom bomb, for instance, kind of situation. So what we've done is, in the organization I'm talking about, we're subject to the Open Meetings Law too. When there's a motion for an executive session, again, on a very specific topic, as in accordance with law, the people who are in the meeting are notified of that because there's a motion and a vote, and those individuals are moved to the waiting room for that period of time. And then obviously when executive session is done, there's a motion to come out of executive session, and then those individuals are moved back into the meeting itself. So you can kind of toggle or drag people back and forth. We found that works pretty well. It's very similar to saying, please leave the room for a little bit. In a way, it's much more efficient. You don't have that 5 or so minutes where people are sort of wandering around and talking while you're trying to go into executive session. You move them in and out. So I would encourage either breakout rooms, I think Kristen used the term, or a waiting room. That's another way to do it.
Thanks. That's great. This question, I think, is more directed to Kristen. This is almost first. I want to thank you throughout this whole pandemic for always being open and taking my calls and
Sure.
helping through this process, because this is going to go along a very similar phone call that we have every couple of weeks together, and that is EO 202.60 extended the ability for counties to have these virtual public meetings through October 4th, I think is the latest. For planning purposes, do you believe this will be extended again? Are you hearing anything on that front, or are we in a wait and see right now?
No, I haven't heard anything. Our executive director always tries to keep in touch with the governor's office. But we usually, if we find out before the rest of the world at all, it's usually, within hours, if we're lucky, a day. But my advice to people for planning purposes is to plan as if it will be extended. I think the worst case scenario is that you have to cancel and reschedule for an in-person meeting if necessary. But given where we are right now, with school just restarting, I honestly can't imagine that that the executive order won't get extended for another month. It's my understanding, and Patrick, maybe you can weigh in on this too, is that the reason why it's month to month is I think that's established by the governor isn't permitted to do extensions, beyond a month. And, that's what, early on there, people are like, well, why is it a month? Why is it month by month by month? And my understanding is that's what the governor's only permitted to do is month-long extensions.
Yeah, that's my understanding as well. And I think that is what's going on. And then also, we get the twofold question of why is it only 1 month, and why are we hearing last minute? The part of the last minute, it goes to the fact that I think it is only once a month, where meaning if the governor extended this, let's say today, then it only
you lose a week, or you
lose a week, right? So then it'd have to be extended every 3 weeks, as opposed to if they wait until the last day, now there's a full month where they have this ability before they need to address it again.
I think that's largely.
But as I said, I would plan. I'm sorry, Aaron.
Yeah, no, I'm sorry. I was just going to say, I think that's just a matter of the timing on the executive order. we've been acting as if it's going to be extended, right? Because you can't not, I guess, from that perspective. Our meetings typically are this currently with the committee of the whole on the second Thursday and the legislative session on the third Thursday. We need lead time to make all that happen, a week to 10 days at least to make that happen. So you kind of have to assume it's going to be extended. And then, like you said, Chris, I think if it's not, then you would adjust.
Okay, this last question is kind of a two-parter, and probably the first part for Kristen and the next part for Aaron or Brian. And it goes into a lot of what we're talking about on that at first it was a bit of a struggle, but I think it's working, and in fact, arguably, the public's never had more access to these meetings. So, Kristen, do you think that the state legislature would be open when this pandemic subsides? That is this something potentially we could have at least some flexibility going forward? Have you heard any rumblings from the state of perhaps not exactly what we're doing, but more flexibility on virtual meetings or opt-ins? And I guess the second part to Aaron or Brian would be, what are you hearing from those around the state that do your jobs? Do you think there would be an appetite for this going forward if there was that kind of state legislative ability?
I haven't heard anything specifically from different legislators, but it's two parts. One, I've heard from the people that maybe feel like that this is not enough access. I think Aaron mentioned that people like to see in person, like to see their legislators and have that in-person access. So you hear from certain groups of people that that the remote access is not enough to meet their needs. But to be honest, what I've heard much more frequently is the public loves being able to access these meetings online. Instead of having to set aside time, a couple of hours in the evening to go to a school board meeting, they can log on with their phones, their home computers, they can make dinner while they're watching. It's hard to, busy lives, busy families, it's hard to set aside time, and you want to be involved in your local government, you want to be involved in your school district business, you want to know what's going on, but it's hard to pull to take time out of your busy schedules to attend in person. And I think many people like this option. Do I think that there will be a day where public bodies are permitted to bar in-person attendance indefinitely? No. I think there's always going to be an obligation to have some sort of in-person attendance to some extent, but I would not be surprised if legislation gets pushed that encourages local governments to the extent possible to make remote access permanent.
So I think I would agree with what Kristen said. I think it's sort of a mix across the state. There are individuals I know in our county that would prefer to continue the remote access as a board member because they're still nervous about the pandemic. And as the fall gets along further and further, we hope we don't go backwards, but I think that is a real concern, as well as the individuals that want to come back in person all the time. So it's a mix. It's really across the board. We would like to see it, I think, to have it as an option for us moving forward.
Yeah, I think the interesting thing about this is if the option is to continue like we've been doing, I think that presents much more of an opportunity to continue doing it, if that makes sense. If there's requirements about meeting notices and people's houses and things like that, I think that makes it tougher. I would say that, at least from my perspective, I worked for the state legislature for a number of years. Probably if someone asked this a few years ago, or even a year ago, I'd say I don't think that would even be a thing that they'd probably be considering, because there's still a thing about people seeing firsthand their government and business, working. I don't know how to describe what that is. But there's something about that in America, right, where people should be able to observe in person what's going on. I mean, if it was an option, I think some would consider it. From our perspective, hybrid is not something that necessarily would work well. I mean, if you're showing it, you know, broadcasting on the internet and having people in person, I think that's fine. But if you have sort of some people in person at a meeting and some people participating virtually, administratively, that is a challenge to manage that. I've been involved in some of that. So I don't think that's something we'd necessarily want to pursue, where some people are basically a tablet on a table and some people are sitting at a table. But if the option was there, you know, I think local governments love options. You know, we oftentimes complain that the state is jamming us on stuff, mandates and whatnot. If the options were there, I'm sure people would consider it. And from our perspective, if those options were done in such a way that they're accomplishable, then we'd certainly be happy with that option being given to us.
Thanks so much. And that's going to conclude this webinar. I want to thank the speakers once again, providing a great education on open meetings. We will have this webinar up on the NYSAC website, both the slides as well as the video presentation, so you can go back if you remember and watch this, and or share this with anyone within the county. We encourage that. I also want to thank the listeners. We've had tremendous attendance. We've had a month-long conference that again couldn't be done without the great speakers we have, but it certainly couldn't be done without you all. That just continue to prove to us that you know, no matter how long you've been, you know, new legislators, old legislators, you're always continuing to get education and want more education to help your residents, and it's fantastic to see, and we appreciate that as an organization representing you. One reminder, we do have one more webinar today at 2 p.m. titled Using Wastewater to Slow the Spread of COVID-19. We hope to see you all there. Take care.